Support comes from Seattle Rep, presenting a bold new season of powerful stories, including the world premiere musical Freak the Mighty, the satire Eureka Day, and the award-winning classic Amadeus. Subscriptions to the 2026-27 season include free exchanges and discounts at local businesses. Visit seattlerep.org.
Seattle's economy is complicated. Inflation, tariffs, AI, layoffs. It's a lot to keep track of.
That's where we come in. I'm Joshua McNichols.
And I'm Monica Nicholsberg.
We host Booming, a podcast about the economic forces shaping our lives here in the Pacific Northwest.
Every week, we dig into the big questions about our economy and where you fit in.
Find Booming on the KUOW app or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Hey, I'm Katie Campbell, and this is Meet Me Here, KUOW's Arts and Culture podcast. On this week's bonus episode, I'm speaking with environmental author Terry Tempest Williams about her new book, The Glorians, Visitations from the Wholly Ordinary. If you're familiar with Terry's work, you know that she captures not only the physical beauty of the natural world, but she also invites the reader to deepen their spiritual understanding and connection with the environment. In The Glorians, Terry seeks to understand the obscure meaning of moments in her life, from the personal to the universal, a way to reveal the joy in the ordinary. And Terry joins me now. Welcome, and thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Katie, and thank you for what you do for all of us as writers and readers.
Oh, you're way too kind, and I wouldn't expect anything less. I should say, I actually listened to the audiobook version, and hearing you narrate it was an extra special treat. So I'll give that thanks right back to you.
Thank you.
So you start the book in March 2020. We all know that was a hard time in the world. You teach at the Harvard Divinity School, and you write about sending your students home for remote classes because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And you write about all the other awkward and scary things we collectively experienced during those early days of the pandemic. But during that uncertainty, you had a dream that kind of started you on the journey of writing this book. Can you tell us about the mission that came out of that dream?
I can. And for your listeners' benefit, maybe I can just quickly describe the dream.
Yes.
This happened a week after lockdown, which was Friday the 13th, 2020. So 1 week later, the only time in my life I've remembered the date of a dream. The dream I had was this. I was walking across Harvard Yard. It was fall, resplendent, red maples, beech trees, yellow bronze oaks. What I see is a female professor with students behind her who've taken the direct route up the staircase to the tower, and the gate is locked. And the professor says to me, "Terry, do you remember the vow you made to us?" And I said, "Remind me." And she said, "Your vow is the epic documentation of the Glorians." And then I woke up and I thought, what is a Glorian? And then, as my grandmother taught her grandchildren to do, I've always had a pad of paper and a pencil by my bedstand. I wrote in the dark, the epic documentation of the Glorians. I didn't want to forget that vow for a second time. And that really was the fire behind this book.
That's so amazing to remember a dream like that. But you said to yourself, what is a Glorian? Well, what is a Glorian? How did you ultimately come to define one?
Well, I did what anyone would do in the 21st century. I Googled it and found nothing. And I just went into the darkest part of the web, and I finally found a dictionary that listed Glorian as a male or female name that denotes beauty. But that wasn't good enough for me. Nothing else. And I let it go, even though it remained a haunting. The next year, on the anniversary of the pandemic, I thought, the Glorians, maybe there's a new definition. So I Googled it again, and this time what popped up was the Urban Dictionary, and it said, Glorian, a hoarder of toilet paper. And I thought, that is not what I want to devote my life to. And then a strange thing happened. I saw an ant, and I followed that ant for close to an hour. What else did we have in the pandemic but time? And the ant was carrying a magenta blossom on top of its head, held in its mandibles. And every time it started to move, I would inch closer, and I followed it around the patio. When I saw that it was about to drop off onto the land itself, I thought, that's it will capsize. And 3 other ants appeared out of nowhere and helped lift this wee little thing and the parasol of petal over the edge, disappear. Again, it continues on its way. Up ahead, I saw a prickly pear patch. Again, it's going to be impaled. Again, from nowhere, from everywhere, 3 more attending ants appeared, and together they lifted it up, out, around, and over, not impaled, disappeared, and they go on their way. And I saw this clay-covered fist rising on the horizon. I saw where the ant hill was. I watched this little ant carrying this blossom all the way up, toiling, laboring until it got on top. It went to the opening of the ant colony, laid its burden down. Dozens and dozens and dozens of ants came, broke it into tiny little bits, and collectively they carried it down into what I imagined was the pathway to the queen. And I thought, that is a Glorian. Focused attention is a Glorian. A moment of grace, a Glorian. Elan vital, paying attention to the life around us.
Yeah. You say, what else did we have time to do in that time? And I love that as I read the book, I realized that so much of that time you spent observing the nature around you. And I'll also say I spent 2020 in Phoenix, so I was in the Sonoran Desert, and so much of what you wrote about the Glorians in the desert really resonated with me. The rains and how swiftly they could change the landscape, the animals, the snakes, the coyotes, all of these incredible creatures. I definitely found solace in the desert at that time, and that really resonated.
And we were lucky, Katie.
Yes.
I never felt isolated. I never felt lonely. I mean, these moments of kinship with other species kept us species fluid, not isolated.
Yeah.
And so many of my friends, so many of my students around the world had just the opposite. It was terrifying, especially those in high-density urban landscapes. Some of them never left their apartment, rarely.
Right.
So I realized what a privilege that was, to have time to be out in the land, in the natural world, where it was not only a breathing space, but a relational space.
And you do acknowledge those deep feelings of terror and loneliness as well. And early in the book, you write, quote, "That which is most personal is most universal. If I felt something, might you feel this too?" And that was really striking to me. It feels like the world lacks a lot of empathy right now, at least to me, it feels that way. What do you feel right now? And do you still find universality in that?
It's such a great question. And I think during that time, it was terrifying. Our own species, even meeting another human being, you thought, am I going to inflict harm on this person? Am I going to infect that person? Are they going to, infect me? And I think we're just beginning to get over that. And I realized with my students, no one was writing about the pandemic when we returned in 2021, and no one wanted to. And I'm finding now we're just starting to inch our way back into that period to realize what did happen. How do I feel now? I'm terrified that we're at war. I'm heartbroken that we have ice now, not only on the streets, but in the airports. I can tell you, coming out of the Atlanta airport, it is a nightmare. And yet, here we're seeing these heinous acts, which we all witnessed on the streets of Minneapolis. But we also witnessed these extraordinary acts of compassion and love, bearing witness, being with, staying with the troubles. And I'm seeing this everywhere I go on this book tour. People are so kind. They are so hungry for gathering together in the name of solidarity. So we're seeing both ends of the spectrum. And I find that encouraging that we are holding on to our humanity at a time when so many actions are inhumane.
Support comes from Seattle Rep, presenting a bold new season of powerful stories, including the world premiere musical Freak the Mighty, the satire Eureka Day, and the award-winning classic Amadeus. Subscriptions to the 2026-27 season include free exchanges and discounts at local businesses. Visit seattlerep.org.
Soundside brings you beyond the headlines with news and conversation rooted in the Pacific Northwest. I'm Libby Dankman. Every week I sit down with local journalists for Soundside's Front Page, where we give you a shortcut to understanding the latest news and cultural moments and how they affect us here in the Puget Sound region. It's all here on Soundside, on the radio or streaming Monday through Thursday at noon and 8 p.m. on KUOW, on the KUOW app, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Many of the Glorians that you documented do kind of have that hope that you're describing, and they're beautiful and alive. But at one point you ask, quote, can a lament be a Glorian? And the answer you seem to come to, for yourself at least, I think, is yes. There are many laments that you sit in, from the devastation of wildfires to the loss of Harvard's divinity tree and your own brother. So some people who, especially those who are sitting in their fear and sadness now, might be asking, why might something you lament be a Glorian?
And thank you so much for your careful reading. I think a Glorian is a lament because it invites us into grief. And you can say, excuse me? You're providing an invitation to grief. But I think if we're honest, grief is love. And anytime we commit to love, whether it's another human being, whether it's a place, whether it's kinship with our cats or dogs, we are invited into love. And we also know that we will be invited into grief, that they are siblings. And I think that the fact that we have chosen to turn away from grief, to look away, to walk away, I think that in many ways, the violence that we are seeing in our country is coming out sideways because we haven't grieved. We haven't grieved our history, whether it's enslaved people, whether it's the cultural genocide of Native people, and we have not grieved the deaths of over 1 million citizens in our country, many of whom are our loved ones, friends, family. And I think if we do not properly grieve, then that sorrow does come out sideways in inexplicable ways and in oftentimes depression or violence.
I've heard you say something similar in other interviews, that love and cruelty are also siblings. What do you mean by that?
I'm thinking of Hemingway. I was just reading some of his letters, and he says, love always ends badly. Don't you love that? It's sort of macabre, but, you know, Brooke and I have, my partner, we've been married 50 years. And someone said the other day, you know, what's your secret? I think we fight well. You know, and sometimes I've been very cruel to Brooke, and I think he would say the same, that in that passion, because we're comfortable with each other, we lash out. But we also know how to forgive. We also know how to hold each other close. And I think that's also part of love and marriage and friendship, to not be afraid of the hard questions, to not be afraid of the difficult conversations. And again, I think here we are in this polarized moment of anything but the United States politically. And yet I think what we're most hungry for are real, honest conversations. And Brooke and I have come to holding difficult dinner parties in our little community of 250 people, bringing diverse interests together, diverse people, diverse politics, diverse religious alliances. And I can't tell you how tender those conversations have become.
That's really incredible to hear, because we are at this time where political tensions are so high. The climate is in chaos. Name whatever anxiety-inducing thing you prefer. What advice would you give to someone that could help them find the Glorians in their own lives, especially to look through those difficult conversations and find the Glorian on the other side?
I think we're all looking for hope. I'll be honest, it's not a word I love. I think it's attached to our desires. I had a hard lesson learning about hope. My mother was diagnosed with ovarian cancer. This was 30 plus years ago. We were extremely close. Her diagnosis was ovarian cancer, not a good prognosis. But the doctor was hopeful. We were hopeful. And she had surgery. The doctor came back and said, it looks promising. And I gave one of the most impassioned speeches to my mother about hope I've ever given, because I believed it and I wanted it. And I did not want my mother to die because I could not imagine life without her. The biopsy came back and there was more cancer and it was aggressive. And I will never forget my mother looking at me and saying, Terry, I could have handled this. Why couldn't you have?
Oh.
And I realized that I had intercepted my mother's acceptance of the what is, in terms of my own hope that everything would go back to how it once was. And I think in that moment, Katie, I made a vow that I wouldn't look away, that hope wasn't the desired outcome, but rather being present was.
Yeah.
And I don't have any advice for anyone, but what I have learned for myself is that if I'm present, I will know what to do. And that's what I trust. And I've come to believe that there is something deeper than hope. And for me, that is engagement.
I want to dwell on that just a little longer, because hope and doubt seem to be kind of quietly or sometimes loudly at war in the Glorians. A lot of it made me smile and feel some kind of encouragement, but other times it was like we were just enjoying like our final moments with a loved one, in many cases in your stories, the earth. At one point you write, quote, I want honest conversations that do not end on the obligatory hopeful note. We do not get to sing that song anymore. This is a real world and it is dying. So we do not need to end on an obligatory hopeful note here, Terry, but I wonder what kind of note we should end on. Like, what is your ultimate message to your readers and people listening to our conversation?
That, what you just read, sounds very dark, doesn't it?
It does.
But I think the context is important. The context was standing on the shores of Great Salt Lake.
Yes.
Who was retreating at a cost that will endanger the lives of 2.5 million people and 12 million migrating birds, to just begin there. And I can't tell you how many times in those years when we were just realizing what was happening, everyone would say, it'll be fine. Actually, it won't be fine if we don't change. And I think that's what I'm advocating, is that if we are present in this moment of radical change, we can engage in ways we didn't even imagine. That the Glorians are inviting us to create a new way of being, to create a new way of seeing. And in the case of Great Salt Lake, we can conserve water. We can question and critique 80% of the water that should go to Great Salt Lake is going to alfalfa, which is exported to support cows. Is that a value we want to maintain? Can we have one crop of alfalfa, not three? Can we find federal funding that will show new ways of farming that can still keep the farmers in business and yet still sustain Great Salt Lake, who sustains all of us? That's what I'm asking for, and that's what I'm exploring. Final example, we had 5 flash floods in our small town of Castle Valley. And how are we going to live in the middle of a mega drought in a place where it is so dry at night, you could hear the grasshoppers chewing everything to its stubs, where it's a hot wind that blisters your skin. Um, we're having those hard conversations. We're having these dinner parties to where one of the Mormon elders, a patriarch, Richard Williams, in the middle of dinner said, "May I ask a question? We're in floods. Where does the water want to go?" That was a different question. Dishes were cleared, maps put out. Suddenly, it was a chiropractic shift. Could we walk the path of water and learn something to see where the water wants to go, not where we want to put it? And that now has inspired a different conversation.
That's amazing to think about because, I look back at my time in Arizona, as I mentioned. I was a politics reporter. They were writing the drought contingency plan that needed to be rewritten while I was covering the legislature. And it was supposed to last, I want to say, at least a decade. And I left there 5 years ago, and they've already rewritten that plan to try to cope with what we're seeing. And I don't know that I've ever heard it framed in that way. It's easy for you and I, maybe not easy, but it's easier, it seems, for you and I to have conversations about asking where the water wants to go. But how do we get, people who aren't reading your book to ask that question?
But the question that was asked was by someone who is a complete Donald Trump supporter, and it was our neighbor who wears a MAGA hat everywhere she goes, that in the town meeting said it can no longer be about private property rights and what's good for us as individuals. We need to ask the question, what's good for the community? And again, that changed the conversation. So I think that, when we see the climate changing, when we see Great Salt Lake, a Pleistocene saline lake retreating to record lows, when we see 5 flash floods, absolutely, depending on your choice of words, transforming our valley or destroying it, you start to ask the difficult questions because our lives and the lives of those we love and the landscape we call home are being affected.
Yeah. Well, early on in the book, you wrote that fear and uncertainty brought you to this idea of the Glorians that we've been talking about. And you say you were unraveling during that time. So I want to know, are you still unraveling, Terry?
Every day, every day. And re-raveling, How do we live with uncertainty when in fact that's all there is? How do we slow down? How do we make sure we have real contacts when every contact we have is online, or every phone call we make now is with an AI voice? Just yesterday, I will tell you, I was having a conversation with an AI being, whatever it is, and I was so desperate. I finally said, I just want to have a conversation with a human being. And this AI voice said, "I'm sorry, I can't help you with that." And I just scream, it's like, how do we get out of this?
Yeah.
And I was so happy when finally a human being came on, and I just went, "Oh, I'm so grateful for you." And she said, "Well, I haven't done anything yet." And I said, "No, you're breathing." So how do we humanize our world? How do we continue to make contact? How do we get up and watch a lunar eclipse and be changed by it? And realize there are some things that don't change because change is all around us and they embody change like the moon. So I think for me, it's just, how do I slow down? How do I engage in a way that is meaningful? And how do we take care of one another at a time when everything feels threatening and threatened?
Well, Terry, thank you so much for helping me slow down a little today, hopefully helping our readers slow down. Terry Tempest Williams, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Katie, and take special care.
Thank you. Terry's latest book is The Glorians, Visitations from the Holy Ordinary. If you'd like to hear more from Terry, she will be speaking at Town Hall Seattle on Thursday, April 9th. You'll find the link in the show notes. Thanks for listening to Meet Me Here. Meet Me Here is produced by KUOW, a proud member of the NPR network. It's hosted by me, Katie Campbell, Dyer Oxley, and Jeannie Yandel, and it's produced by Matt Martin, Brandy Fullwood, and Kyle Norris. Our editor is Phyllis Fletcher. You can find more and support the show at kuow.org/meet.
Support comes from Seattle Rep, presenting a bold new season of powerful stories, including the world premiere musical Freak the Mighty, the satire Eureka Day, and the award-winning classic Amadeus. Subscriptions to the 2026-27 season include free exchanges and discounts at local businesses. Visit seattlerep.org.
Every Friday on Seattle Now, we break down the week's news. Bad news for couples in Pierce County. Hundreds of love locks were cut off of a bridge in Gig Harbor last month. Does this mean the couples have to break up now?
Yes.
Is it a curse now?
It's the law. That's like a subsection of the ordinance when the lock is cut off. They have to break up. Sorry.
Hear that and more on Seattle Now, wherever you get your podcasts.